Welcome. You've chosen to spend the next 2 hours drifting gently through history, exploring the Roman world, not from the marble steps of the Senate or the triumphant arches of generals, but from the worn, calloused perspective of those whose labor made Rome's grandeur possible. This is a quiet journey, one that invites you to settle in, take a deep breath, and imagine the texture of life 2,000 years ago. The dusty streets, the chatter of the marketplace, and the slow rhythm of a day that began with the rising of the sun. In this episode, we will explore what it was really like to be a Roman slave. We will walk through a typical day, the waking bells, the endless chores, and the wearying routines. Then we will turn to the story of Spartacus, the enslaved gladiator who rose to lead one of the most famous rebellions in history. Later, we will explore the mystery of Rome's secretive cults, where worshippers met by torchlight in underground chambers. And finally, we will step into the opulent homes of Rome's elite, where lavish feasts and intricate mosaics painted a very different picture of life. But first, we begin where most Romans began each day, with the dawn. And for a slave in ancient Rome, dawn was never quiet for long. Imagine yourself waking on a hard straw mat in the corner of a dim room. The air is cool and faintly smoky, carrying the mixed scents of oil lamps that burn through the night and the faint sweetness of yesterday's bread stored nearby. There is no time to stretch or linger. Already the head servant is stirring others awake, and the day must begin. You belong to a household, perhaps a small workshop or a sprawling villa on the outskirts of the city. The first task is always the same. Tend to the house before the master wakes. The floors must be swept, the courtyard sprinkled with water to settle the dust, and the fire coaxed back to life from yesterday's ashes. If the household has children, you may be tasked with dressing them, tying small tunics, washing faces, brushing away the sleep from their hair before lessons begin. The work feels endless, but it follows a rhythm. Water must be fetched from the nearest fountain, balanced carefully in clay jars along narrow streets still empty in the early morning. If you work in a kitchen, the next hour is filled with chopping, grinding, and stirring. Wheat must be ground into flour with a heavy stone quern. Olives are pressed for oil. You may be sent to the market to buy fish, a task that requires quick bargaining with vendors shouting their prices in the dawnlight. Some slaves work in the fields outside the city, tending vineyards or wheat plots owned by wealthy citizens. Their day begins before sunrise, moving in long lines through rows of grapevines, hands stained dark by the fruit, backs bent under the weight of baskets. Others work in workshops, crafting pottery, weaving cloth, or laboring at forges where the heat builds steadily as the sun climbs higher. The body grows weary, but there is little pause. Meals are brief, often just a crust of bread, a handful of olives, perhaps a taste of thin wine mixed with water. The main meal of the household will come later in the day, and much of your time is spent preparing it for others, not sitting to enjoy it yourself. There is also the constant presence of supervision. In large estates, an overseer, a stern figure with a staff, moves among the workers, calling out instructions, checking progress. The punishments for disobedience or delay are well known, and so you keep your head down, focusing on the task until it is completed. As the day wears on, the city grows louder. The streets fill with the clatter of carts, the calls of street vendors, the bleating of goats being driven to market. You may be sent on errands, carrying messages or goods from one end of the city to the other, moving through a crowd of citizens, soldiers, merchants, and beggars. You see fragments of Roman life everywhere. Public fountains decorated with carved faces, children playing with knuckle bones, a priest leading a small ritual at a street corner altar. When the afternoon arrives, the household's master might host visitors, and you must stand ready, refilling cups, sweeping floors between courses, making sure the cushions are arranged just so. You do not speak unless spoken to. You become almost invisible, yet every movement is watched. By evening, your body is tired. The household settles, and you tidy the rooms once more before the lamps are snuffed out. Perhaps, if you are fortunate, you share quiet conversation with the other slaves, small stories about family or memories of the places you once called home. Perhaps you say nothing at all, listening instead to the distant hum of the city until sleep comes again. This was the rhythm of life for countless people in the Roman world. It was not a life of comfort, but it was a life that kept Rome running, an endless cycle of work and rest, dawn and dusk, under the watchful eyes of others. And while some accepted their lot, others dreamed of freedom. Our next story follows one such man, a Thracian slave who would rise from the gladiators' arena to shake the Roman Republic itself. Imagine now a man standing in the dust of a training yard. The sun is bright overhead, and the sound of wooden practice swords strikes in a steady rhythm. This man is Spartacus, not yet a legend, not yet the leader of a revolt, but simply one among many men forced to fight for the entertainment of Rome. Spartacus was a Thracian from a region north of Greece, a land of rugged hills and strong warrior traditions. We do not know the exact details of his early life, but we know he served as a soldier, perhaps in Rome's own auxiliary forces, before falling into captivity. Captured, sold, and sent to a gladiator school in Capua, his life became one of training, discipline, and danger. Gladiator schools, or ludi, were not merely places of fighting. They were prisons with walls high enough to keep even the strongest inside. Each day began early, with meals designed to build strength: barley porridge, beans, dried fruit. Training followed, with endless drills using heavy wooden swords that were deliberately made heavier than real weapons to strengthen the arms and condition the body. The men practiced fighting in pairs, learning different styles: the net and trident of the retiarius, the sword and shield of the secutor, the curved blade of the thraces. Each man was prepared to face death in the arena, and to do so with composure. But Spartacus and others like him did not accept this life quietly. In 73 BCE, along with about 70 other gladiators, he planned an escape. The story says they armed themselves with kitchen knives and skewers, seizing real weapons once they reached the storehouse. They fought their way out, taking refuge on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, the same mountain that would later bury Pompeii. From this small band, a movement grew. Fugitives, runaway slaves, and discontented farmers joined them. Their numbers swelled into the thousands. For 2 years, Spartacus led this group across Italy, defeating Roman forces sent to capture them. He was not merely a fighter, he was a strategist, using the terrain to his advantage, outmaneuvering disciplined Roman legions again and again. The rebellion was not a simple tale of vengeance. It was also a search for freedom. Spartacus is said to have wanted to lead his followers north, beyond the Alps, back to their homelands. For a time it seemed possible, but the lure of Rome's riches and perhaps the lack of a clear plan among so many thousands kept them in Italy. Rome responded by sending more and more troops, until eventually the rebellion was crushed in a final battle in southern Italy. The end was grim. Spartacus himself is believed to have died fighting on the battlefield, refusing to retreat. The survivors, thousands of them, were captured and crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies left as a warning to any who might rebel again. It is a sobering story, but also one that echoes through history. Spartacus became a symbol of resistance, his name remembered long after the dust of the arena had settled. Even today, when we speak of rising against impossible odds, his name is invoked. As you picture that quiet road lined with crosses, consider the world these men once walked through, the roads they traveled, the markets they passed, the fields and temples that saw their movement. In our next segment, we will step away from the clash of rebellion and move instead into the shadows. into the secretive underground chambers of Rome, where men and women gathered by torchlight to worship gods whose names are almost forgotten. The streets of Rome are growing quieter now. The sun has set and lanterns glow softly along the main roads. But somewhere beyond the busy forum, in a shaded courtyard or beneath a simple house, a group of men and women gather in silence. These are the mystery cults, secretive religious groups that offered something the traditional Roman gods did not. A promise of personal salvation, of transformation, of belonging to something beyond the reach of ordinary life. One of the most famous of these was the cult of Mithras. Its worshippers met in Mithraea, small cave-like temples, often built underground. The space was narrow, long, and dimly lit, with benches along the sides where initiates would sit, and a carved image at the far end showing Mithras slaying a sacred bull. Imagine stepping into one of these temples. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of oil lamps and incense. The only sounds are hushed voices and the distant trickle of water from a small basin. Initiates gather quietly, sharing a meal that represents the bond between them. The ceremonies are kept secret, but we know they involved ritual stages, perhaps 7 levels of initiation, each with symbolic trials that the initiate had to pass. These cults were not limited to Mithras. There were many others. The cult of Isis from Egypt, whose processions filled the streets with music and flowers, inviting followers to join in her mysteries. The cult of Bacchus, which was once suppressed by the Senate for fear that its ecstatic rites would disrupt public order. And later, Christianity, which began as one of these small, secret gatherings before spreading across the empire. For many slaves, these cults offered a kind of refuge. Inside the temple, there was no distinction between master and servant. All who were initiated shared in the same ritual meal, stood under the same torchlight, and listened to the same teachings of rebirth and eternal life. The appeal was powerful. In a world where daily life could feel unchanging, where fate was decided by birth and status, the promise of a new beginning, of belonging to a sacred brotherhood, must have felt like breathing fresh air after a long confinement. When archaeologists uncover these sites today, they find traces of this secret world. Altars worn smooth by centuries of touch, painted stars on ceilings imitating the night sky, broken lamps left behind when the cults were abandoned. Each discovery brings us closer to the quiet, hidden part of Roman life, a world that thrived just beyond the public temples and grand processions. As we leave the darkness of these chambers and step back into the city above, we find ourselves in a different Rome. A Rome of polished marble halls, of glittering mosaics, of feasts and banquets and politics. In our final segment, we will explore the world of the Roman elite, a world that seemed impossibly distant to the slaves and workers who kept it running. A world of gold and silver, of perfumed baths and endless courses of food. Imagine now that you step through a tall carved doorway into the atrium of a Roman villa. The air is cool here, scented faintly with olive oil and the polished wood of furniture. Sunlight streams through an open square in the roof, the compluvium, falling into a shallow pool below that catches the sky's reflection. This is the home of an elite Roman citizen, perhaps a senator, perhaps a wealthy merchant, and everything around you speaks of status. Slaves move quietly, tending to the spaces before guests arrive. Marble floors are swept smooth, bronze lamps are polished until they gleam, and the day's meal is being prepared in the kitchen. The walls are decorated with bright frescoes, mythological scenes, lush gardens, and still-life paintings of fruit and flowers. Even the floors are works of art, mosaics made from thousands of tiny colored tiles arranged in intricate geometric patterns. The master of the house begins his morning by receiving visitors. Clients line up to pay their respects, bowing or offering words of loyalty. This ritual, known as the salutatio, reinforces the ties between patron and client an invisible network of favors and obligations that kept Roman society in motion. Later in the day comes the bath. A short walk brings you to the bath complex, either a private one attached to the villa or one of the great public baths of Rome. Here time slows, slaves help remove clothing, oil is rubbed onto the skin and then scraped away with curved tools, leaving the body refreshed. Warm pools, hot pools and cold plunges follow, each one easing the muscles after the morning's business. By evening, the cena, the main meal of the day, is ready. Guests recline on couches arranged in a U-shape around a low table. The meal comes in several courses, perhaps eggs and olives first, followed by roasted meats, fresh bread and vegetables seasoned with herbs. Wine is mixed with water in large bowls, and the conversation flows easily. Politics, philosophy, the latest news from the forum. Entertainment might follow. A musician plucking a soft melody on a lyre, or a poet reciting verses while the lamps glow gently. The evening draws on slowly, the household wrapped in warmth and conversation. Beyond the villa's walls, the city grows quiet. But inside, there is comfort, safety, and abundance. For those who labored outside these halls, such luxury might have seemed unimaginable. And yet both worlds, the humble quarters of the slave and the decorated rooms of the master, were part of the same Rome, each dependent on the other. Conclusion, gentle reflection. And so, as night deepens over Rome, we leave both the villa and the servants' quarters behind. The lamps are being put out one by one. The streets grow still, save for a distant cart rattling over stones or the occasional bark of a dog. In the quiet, you can almost feel the city breathe. The same moon that shone over the slave also lit the mosaics of the master's dining hall. The same dawn that woke the laborers also roused the senators to debate and plan. Rome was a world of contrasts, but also a world bound together by routines, work, rest, ritual, and the slow turning of the seasons. As you return to the present moment, consider how far away that world is now. The dust of the training yard has long since settled. The cries of the market have faded. But the traces of their lives, their roads, their walls, their stories, still reach us across the centuries, whispering of a time when the empire lived and breathed. Allow those whispers to fade now. Let the rhythm of the past lull you into stillness. You are here, safe, far from the noise and labor of ancient Rome. Close your eyes, let the streets grow silent, and drift gently into rest.